Hello and welcome back to the channel. In the previous video, we looked at arrays and array lists. And in this video, we're going to be looking at classes and objects in more depth. The first thing we're going to do is create a new class. And we're going to call it time1. And we won't be running this program directly, so we're not going to tick public static void main. And we're going to press on finish. So we're going to be using this class to represent time, and we're going to have two different formats of displaying time. One is going to be in 24-hour format, and another is going to be in 12-hour format. So the first thing we need to do is define our instance variables. So we're going to have private int hour, private int minute, and finally private int second. The next thing we're going to do is define a setTime method that is going to take in an hour, a minute, and a second, and it's going to set it to our instance variables. So we're going to have a public method. It's not going to return anything, so we're going to have void, and we're going to call the method setTime. And as we said, it's going to take in three inputs. So we're going to have int h, int m, and int s. And inside our method, we're going to be using something called a ternary operator. So a ternary operator is similar to an if-else statement, and we're going to see how we can use it. The first thing we're going to set is the hour. Now here, we're going to do some validation. So we're going to check if the inputted hour is between 0 and 24. So we're going to have if h is greater than or equals to 0, and if h is less than 24. So if this condition is true, we're going to do something, and the thing we're going to do is going to be placed after the question mark. So in our case, if h is between 0 and 24, that means it's a valid hour. So we're going to set our hour instance variable to h. And if that is not the case, then the statement after the colon is going to be assigned to our hour variable. So when using the setTime method, if we enter an hour that is not valid, we're going to set our hour instance variable to 0. We're going to apply the same validation for minute and second. So we're going to have minute, and we're going to check if m is greater than or equals to 0, and m is less than 60. So if this is true, we're going to set our minute instance variable to m, and if it's not true, we're going to set it to 0. Finally, we're going to have second, and we're going to check if s is greater than or equals to 0, and if s is less than 60. So if this is true, we're going to set second to s, and if it's not true, we're going to set it to 0. Next, we're going to define the different ways we're going to print out our time. So we're going to have another method. It's going to be public, and its return type is going to be string, and we're going to call it toUniversal string. And in this method, we're going to return a string. To return a formatted string, we can use string.format. So we're going to have %02d colon %02d %02d. So the 02 between the percent and d, make sure that whatever we put in the placeholder is going to be padded with zeros, and it's going to have 2 digits. So in the first %d, we're going to substitute hour. In the second one, we're going to substitute minute. And in the final one, we're going to substitute second. So this method is simply going to display our time in 24-hour format. The next method we're going to define is going to display our time in 12-hour format. So we're going to have public. Its return type is going to be string, and we're going to call it toString. And inside this method, we're going to return another string format, and we're going to have %d colon 02d colon %02d. And finally, we're going to have a %s. So the first %d is going to be the hour, the second is going to be the minute, the third is going to be the second, and the %s is going to be either AM or PM. Now to calculate the time in 12-hour format, we're going to use another ternary operation. So for the hour, we're going to check if hour is equal to 0 or if hour is equal to 12. If this condition is true, we're going to set %d to 12. And if it's not true, we're going to set it to hour modulo 12. So what's happening here is, for example, if we had 13 for the hour and we wanted to convert it to the 12-hour format, we're not going to simply display 13. Instead, we're going to display 13 modulo 12, which is 1. So this is going to calculate our hour. Next, we're going to have the minute. So for the minute, there's no calculation we need to do. We're simply going to substitute minute. And for the second, we're going to do the same. And finally, for the AM and PM, we're going to check a condition. So if hour is less than 12, and if this condition is true, we're going to have AM. And if this condition is not true, then we're going to have PM. And finally, we're going to end our statement. Now, to see how this class is going to work, we're going to save this file, and we're going to create a new class, and we're going to call it time1test. And since we're going to be running this program, we're going to tick public static void main, and we're going to press on finish. So here we're going to create an object of type time1, and we're going to call it time. Next, we're going to access the different methods. So first, we're going to describe what we're printing out. We're going to do that using a print statement. So the first thing we're going to be printing out is the initial universal time. And we're going to have a print statement. And we're going to print out time.toUniversalString. Next, we're going to have another description, which is going to be initial standard time. And we're going to have another print statement, and we're going to call the time.toString method. So now if we save our file and run our code, we get the initial universal time as 000000, and we get the initial standard time as 12:00:00 AM. So the concept we want to see here is that instance variables have default values, and we've discussed this before. So for integers, our default value is going to be 0. So we're going to have a 0 hour, a 0 minute, and a 0 second. And when we're calling the toString method, we need to remember that we had a condition for the hour. So if the hour was 0 or 12, we wanted to display 12. In this case, the hour is 0, so 12 gets displayed. Next, we're going to use the setTime method. So we're going to have time.setTime, and we're going to pass in an hour. Let's give it 13. We're going to pass in a minute, and for the second, we're going to give it 6. And we're going to end our statement. Now we're going to copy the above print statements, and we're going to paste them. And we're going to update our description to final. And now we can save our file and run our code. As you can see, our final universal time is going to be 13:27:06. And when we convert that into 12-hour format, we're going to get 1:27:06 p.m. One more thing we can see here is the toString method. So when we define a toString method in our class, it's actually a special method, which is called when we try to print out our object. So instead of calling the toString method, if we simply pass in time to a print statement, we're going to get the same as calling the toString method. So what is happening here is called method overriding, which we're going to be seeing in future videos. So now if we save our file and run our code, we're going to get the same output. One final thing we're going to see in this class is what happens when we try to access private fields. So we're going to have time.hour, and if we try to set it to, let's say, 7, and if we set time.minute to 15, and time.second to 30, and if we save our file and run our code, we're going to get an error that says the fields are not visible. So this is because we declared our instance variables private. So the concept we take away from this is that the user of our class shouldn't have access to the inner workings of our class. The only thing our client or user should see are the public methods and how to use them. So this is why we define our instance variables as private. The next topic we're going to be looking at is the this keyword. Every object can access a reference to itself with the keyword this. And to see how it works, we're going to create a new class. And we're going to call it this test. And since we're going to be running this class, we're going to take public static void main, and we're going to press on finish. Outside of our this test class, we're going to define another class called simple time. So this is also going to be used to represent the time. So we're going to have private int hour, private int minute, and private int second. Next, we're going to initialize these instance variables, and we're going to be using the constructor. So we're going to have public, and the constructor is going to have the same name as our class. So we're going to have simple time, and we're going to pass in the inputs we want to store in our instance variables. So to see how to use the keyword this, we're going to give the inputs the same name as our instance variables. So we're going to have int hour, int minute, and int second. So one question you may have here is if we set hour to hour, how would the compiler be able to tell the difference between the instance variable hour and the input hour? When this kind of problem arises, we can use the keyword this. So when we use this, we're referring to the current object. So if we had this.hour, then we're referring to the instance variable hour. So we can do the same for minute, and we can do the same for second. So we use the this keyword when we have some sort of overshadowing, when one variable overshadows another variable. And by using this, we can refer to the object itself. And for completion's sake, we're going to define a method that is going to return a string, and it's going to be called toUniversal string. And it's simply going to return a formatted string with the format %0 to d colon %0 to d colon %0 to d. Now we can use the this keyword outside of our constructor as well. So in this method, we can access this.hour, this.minute, and this.second. So this is going to work fine, but since we don't have any sort of overshadowing, the this keyword here is redundant, so we can remove it. And to see that all this code works, we're going to go to our main method, and we're going to create an object of simple time, and we're going to call it time, and we're going to set it equal to new simple time. And since we have a constructor, we need to provide values. We're going to give it 15, 30, and 19. And we're going to have our print statement. And we're going to pass in time.toUniversal string. So we can save our file and run our code. And as you can see, the time gets displayed. In previous videos, we've seen that we can have overloaded methods, but in Java, we can also have overloaded constructors. So an overloaded constructor enables our object to be initialized in different ways. And to overload a constructor, we simply provide multiple constructors with different parameter lists. And when we say different parameter lists, we mean that the number of parameters should be different, or the order of the parameter types should be different. So to see this, we're going to create a new class, and we're going to call it time2. And we won't be running this class directly, so we're now going to tick public static void main, and we're going to press on finish. We're going to have 3 instance variables. The first is going to be hour, the second is going to be minute, and the third is going to be second. Next, we're going to define our constructors. The first constructor we're going to have is going to take in an hour, a minute, and a second. And it's going to initialize our instance variables. Next, we're going to overload this constructor. So we're going to have another public constructor. It's going to have the same name. And this time it's only going to take in an hour and a minute. And what this constructor is going to do is, this isn't required, but this is one important concept you need to know. From a constructor, you can call another constructor. And to do that, we're going to use the this keyword. And we're going to pass in the hour, the minute, and for the second, we're going to pass in 0. So what's happening here is when we create an object, if we only provide the hour and the minute, this constructor is going to call the constructor we defined first, and it's going to give it the hour, the minute, and for the second, it's going to give it 0. Next, we're going to add one more constructor, and this one is only going to take in an hour, and it's going to call the first constructor, and it's going to give it the hour, and for the minute and the second, it's going to give it zeros. If we want to validate the hour, the minute, and the second, what we can do is go to our first constructor, and instead of setting hour directly, we're going to call a method that we haven't defined yet, which is going to be called setHour, and we're going to give it h. And for the minute, we're going to have setMinute, and we're going to give it m. And for the second, we're going to have setSecond, and we're going to give it s. Now we're going to define these methods. So we're going to have public void setHour, which is going to take in an integer as input. And it's going to set our hour instance variable to a condition. So we're going to have if h is greater than or equals to 0, and if h is less than 24, then we're going to set our instance variable to h. If that is not the case, we're going to set it to 0, and we're done with this method. Next, we're going to have public void set minute, which is going to take in a minute as input, and it's going to set our minute variable to the condition if m is greater than or equal to 0, and if m is less than 60, we're going to give it our input m. If that is not the case, we're going to give it 0. And we're going to define our final set method. So it's going to be public void set second. It's going to take in a second as input. And it's going to set our second instance variable to the condition s is greater than or equal to 0 and s is less than 60. If that is the case, we're going to take in the input. And if that is not true, we're going to pass in 0. We're also going to define some getter methods. So we're going to have public int get hour, which is simply going to return the hour instance variable. We're going to have public int get minute, which is going to return our minute variable. And finally, we're going to have public int get second, which is going to return our second variable. Now finally, as we did before, we're going to have two methods that are going to display our time in 24-hour format and in 12-hour format. So we're going to have public string, and we're going to call it toUniversal string, and it's going to return a string format. The format is going to be %02d, %02d, %02d. And now since we've defined getter methods, we can use them here as well. So we can have get hour, get minute, and get second. And we can finish our method. Next, we're going to define the 12-hour format. So it's going to be public string. It's going to be called toString. And as we said before, this is a special method, and it's going to be called when we try to print our object. So inside this method, we're going to return a string format, and the format is going to be %d, %02d, %02d. And for the hour, we're going to have a condition. So we're going to check if get hour is equal to 0 or if get hour is equal to 12. If that is the case, then we're going to set our hour to 12. If that is not the case, we're going to set our hour to get hour modulo 12. So this is going to set our hour. Next, we're going to have our minutes, so we can pass in the get minute method. And for the second, we can pass in the get second method. So that is it for our class. We're going to save this file. And to run it, we're going to create a new class. We're going to call it time2test. And since we're going to be running this program, we're going to take public static void main, and we're going to press on finish. In our method, we're going to create different objects of type time2. So we're going to have time2. We're going to call the first one t1, and we're going to have new time2 and empty parentheses. So this is going to call the constructor that takes in no input, which we actually forgot to define. So we're going to go back to our class, and we're going to define this constructor. So it's going to be public time2. It's not going to take in any input, and it's going to call another constructor, and it's going to pass in all zeros. So we can save this file and go back to our main method. So this is going to create a time object, and it's going to set the hour, minute, second to 0. We're going to have another object, t2, and this time we're going to be calling another constructor. So we're going to give it 2. So this constructor only takes in the hour, and it's going to set our minute and second to 0. We're going to create a third object, and this is going to take in 2 inputs. So it's going to take in the hour, which we can give it 21, and it's going to take in the minute. We're going to give it 34, and it's going to automatically set our second to 0. Next, we're going to have t4, which is going to call the constructor with all 3 inputs. So we're going to have 12, 25, and 42. Another type of constructor we can add is a constructor that takes in the object itself. To see that, we're going to go back to the class, and we're going to define another constructor, and it's going to take in an input of type time2. We're going to call it t. And what this constructor is going to do is it's going to copy the hour, the minute, and the second from our t input, and it's going to set it equal to our current object. So we're going to call the constructor with all 3 inputs, and we're going to give it t.getHour, t.getMinute, and t.getSecond. So this constructor is going to take in a time as input, and it's going to copy the hour, minute, and second values to the object we create. So we can save this file and go back to our main method. And we're going to create one more time object called t5, and we're going to give it t4 as input. So what this is going to do is it's going to copy the hour, the minute, and the second from t4, and it's going to give it to the t5 object. Now to see that the overloaded constructors work, we're going to have a series of print statements. So we're going to have system.out.println, and we're going to pass in t1. We can copy this line, and we're going to pass in t2, t3, t4, and t5. So now if we save our file and run our code. So for the first one, we gave it no input, so it's going to have an hour of 0, a minute of 0, and a second of 0. In this case, we're getting 12 because we're converting it to a 12-hour format. And the second object, we gave it an hour of 2, and the minute and seconds were set to 0. And the third object, we gave it a minute and an hour, and the second was set to 0. And in the fourth object, we gave it all 3 values. And finally, in the fifth object, we gave it another object to copy from, so it's going to have the same time. The final concept we're going to be looking at in this section is a composition. A composition is when a class has an object of other classes as its member. To see this, we're going to create a new class, and we're going to call it date. we're not going to be running this class, so we're not going to tick public static void main, and we're going to press on finish. This class is simply going to display a date, so we're going to have a private instance variable for the month, a private instance variable for the day, and a private instance variable for the year. And we're going to have a constructor, and it's going to take in a month, a day, and a year as input, and it's going to set our instance variables to those inputs. And finally, we're going to have a toString method. So we're going to have public string toString, and we're going to return a string format. And the format is going to be %d space %d space %d. And we're going to substitute month, day, and year. Again, one thing you shouldn't forget is the toString method is a special method. And if we try to print an object of type date, then we're going to be calling this method. Next, we're going to be creating another class. We're going to call it employee, and we won't be running this class as well, so we won't tick public static void main, and we're going to press on finish. So this class is going to represent an employee. So we're going to have a variable of type string, and it's going to be first name. We're also going to have last name. Next, we're going to have a private instance variable of type date. So this is what is called a composition. A member of the class employee is going to have a type of another class. In our case, it's going to have a type of date, and we're going to call it birth date. And we're going to have another composition, and we're going to call it hire date. Next, we're going to define a constructor, and as input is going to take in first name, last name, date of birth, and date of hire. And it's going to set our instance variables. We misspelled first name, so we're going to fix that. It's going to set last name to last. It's going to set birth date to DOB, and it's going to set hire date to DOH. Finally, we're going to define a toString method, and it's going to return a string format, and the format is going to be %s, comma, %s, and it's going to have the hired date, so it's going to be hired. And we're going to have a %s placeholder, followed by a new line, and we're going to have birthday, and another %s, and a new line. And in the first %s, we're going to substitute first name, and the second %s, we're going to substitute last name, and in the third %s, we're going to substitute hire date. As we said, the object itself is going to call the toString method, so we're going to store it in a string placeholder. And for the final %s, we're going to have birth date. And we're going to end our statement and save our file. We misspelled string, so we're going to fix that. And we're going to save our file. To test the employee class, we're going to create another class. We're going to call it employee test. And since we're going to be running this program, we're going to tick public static void main, and we're going to press on finish. In the main method, we're going to have a variable called birth of type date, and we're going to give it 7,24, 1949. So this is going to represent the birth date, and we're going to have another date variable called hire, and we're going to give it 3/12/1988. So we have our date variables. Next, we're going to create an employee object. So we're going to have employee. We're going to call it E, and we're going to set it equal to new employee. For the first name, we're going to give it John. For the last name, we're going to give it Smith. For the date of birth, we're going to give it birth. And for the date of hire, we're going to give it hire. And we're going to end our statement. Finally, to call the toString method of our employee class, we can simply print out the employee object. So now if we save our file and if we run our code, we get the name of our employee followed by the date they were hired and the day they were born. So that is it for this section. In the next video, we're going to be looking at inheritance. Thank you for watching this video, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more programming content.